Welcome everyone. The speech hasn't started yet. You don't need to interpret yet. This is a little introduction. This is a mock council speech, Council of the EU, that I've written. And so first of all, disclaimer, can you not hear me? You can't hear me. All right, keep going. First of all, a disclaimer, this is all made up. There are references to real-world chemicals, programs and institutions, but I'm fairly certain that this isn't really the way that things would work out. I've just tried to think up an issue that could be talked about in council and try to, imagine a little story, but the working party doesn't exist, and most likely things wouldn't actually happen this way. But you'll probably recognize some of the vocab, and the format pretty much resembles the way things happen at council. A bit of vocab before you start. You may want to write this down. Directive, regulation, decision, farm inputs, which includes fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and then you have the names of two herbicides, I can barely pronounce them, trifluralin, and isoproteron. So that's isoproteron. And then my old favorite, scrutiny reservation. Yay, ready for those. And now I want you to write this down. Those are document references. 56185/15 Rev 2. Then Draft Council Regulation number 269/2015 and document 56142/12, because those are going to go fast when I read them out. So this is a mock council meeting on pesticides, herbicides and fertilizers under the Latvian presidency. So I am a Latvian president at the council. And now the speech will actually begin. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to welcome member state delegations as well as the Commission to the 74th meeting of the Working Party on Fertilizers, Pesticides and Herbicides under the Latvian presidency. Before I continue, I would like to announce the language regime for this meeting. You may speak and listen to French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, Greek, Polish, and Romanian. You may speak but not listen to Finnish, Swedish, Czech, Estonian, Latvian, Hungarian, Slovak, Slovenian, and Bulgarian. We now turn to today's agenda. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting of the Working Party. Item 2 on the agenda will be a discussion of document 5615/15 Rev 2. As some delegates will remember, this contains Annexes 2 and Annex 1, so Annex 1 and 2 of Draft Council Regulation number 269/2015 on the restriction of farm inputs. The presidency will be making a short presentation of the issues at hand, in particular to allow the large number of new delegates who have joined the Working Party to familiarize themselves with the subject matter. Item 3 on the agenda will be a consideration of document 56142/12 covering articles 1 to 16 of draft decision number 378/2015 on the use of pesticides in farms within 7.5 kilometers of urban areas. In the light of comments submitted in writing by the delegation of Finland on the 21st of January 2015. Item 4 on the agenda will be a discussion of amendment proposals made by the Commission for document 56142/12. There are currently no items under any other business. The Presidency would now open the floor to delegations wishing to submit items under AOB. Since there are no such requests, we will swiftly move on to the approval of the minutes of the last meeting of the Working Party, which have been circulated. If a delegation does not approve of the minutes as they stand, please take the floor now. Since no delegation has requested the floor, I take it that all delegations wish to approve the minutes. The minutes stand approved. We now turn to Agenda Item 2. Here we will be discussing document 56185/15 Rev 2, containing Annexes 1 and 2 of Draft Council Regulation number 269/2015. The Presidency will now present the issue at hand. The Union has always given very close consideration to matters regarding the use of farming inputs. Firstly, this is because it is a matter related to agriculture. All questions related to agriculture are an area where EU intervention and regulation is not only desirable, but necessary. Agriculture is probably the area where the EU has been most present across member states, in terms of budget size, number of citizens affected, impact on the economy, and impact on the lives of these citizens. The common agricultural policy is undoubtedly the most significant EU policy. It directly or indirectly affects the lives and livelihoods of all citizens of the Union. Naturally, there are many interconnections between Union and national legislation on farm inputs and the CAP. To give but one example, since the CAP will set production quotas, legislation concerning inputs will affect the means that farmers have at their disposal to meet these quotas. Secondly, the other reason for which the Union has always paid close attention to farm inputs is that these directly affect the health of EU citizens. Pesticides and herbicides often seep into the outer layers of produce, while fertilizers can end up inside it. All three types of inputs will often filter through the soil and find themselves in the groundwater, which inevitably ends up on the tables of households across the Union. Over the past few months, civil society organizations have made a point of reminding the world of these facts. However, the Union never waited for this external stimulus to take action and has been regulating use of fertilizers and pesticides for decades now. As a result, the use of some substances has been restricted. The use of others was banned. This was always done following an approach based on scientific evidence and, of course, the precautionary principle. While the legislation has, in the Presidency's opinion, always efficiently and adequately protected the health and interests of EU citizens, this legislation is scattered. Restrictions on most fertilizers were brought about via a directive and are therefore incorporated in member state laws. However, when it later emerged that some new types of fertilizers would fall outside the scope of some of these national laws, a regulation had to be put into place to fill in the gaps. When it comes to pesticides and herbicides, the scenario is much the same, except that, in addition, some council decisions were required, to align some industry practices not covered by directives or regulations. It should be highlighted that fertilizers on the one hand and pesticides and herbicides on the other were covered by separate sets of directives and regulations. This working party was therefore tasked on the 21st of February 2013 with the elaboration of a single regulation that should bring together all elements of EU legislation on fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Before this process began, an impact assessment was carried out, as well as stakeholder consultations. It emerged at the time that some minority groups in the industry were opposed to the setting up of this regulation, as 1. They did not wish for this sort of legislation to limit use of inputs, and 2. They claimed that such legislation represented a violation of the subsidiarity principle, and that such matters should therefore be regulated at member state level. Those views were taken into account at the time, but then represented a minority of stakeholders. When this working party began its drafting work on this regulation, no member state delegation shared those views. The opinion of Parliament on the matter seemed to be aligned with that of member state governments. But a number of developments have taken place since this work began. Parliamentary elections were held, and there have been a number of general elections in member states. At the same time, in accordance with the provisions of EU legislation on fertilizers and pesticides, EU agencies broadened the list of restricted and banned fertilizers and pesticides in the Union. So it now emerges that some of the views earlier outlined, which corresponded to the aforementioned minority of stakeholders, are now held by some member state delegations here in the Council of the European Union, as well as by some political groups at the European Parliament. A new debate is therefore required as to whether the Union should go ahead and draft this regulation or leave the matter in the hands of member states. Before this takes place, however, the Presidency, in consultation with delegations, has decided that a full proposal should be drafted. The Council and Parliament would therefore be left with a clear vision of what it is they are refusing if they decide to refuse. This is when the key question of the annexes come into play. The Presidency believes that the heart of the issue concerns two specific chemicals. Some industry stakeholders have made specific mention of the herbicides trifluralin and isoproteron. These are banned across the EU and have been since 2007. Stakeholders are banned from using it inside the EU, while they are still widely used in the rest of the world. It appears to the Presidency that if those two substances were to be removed from the annex of the draft regulation under consideration today, the claims according to which the EU should not be involved in this matter might be dropped. The main question for consideration under this agenda item today, therefore, is whether to remove these herbicides from the list that appears in Annex 1. We would now like to open the floor for comments. The Commission, then the UK. The Commission, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Commission would like to thank the Presidency for its opening remark on this issue. At this point, the Commission would simply like to point out that it believes that it is paramount that legislation on the matters at hand be at Union level, for a number of reasons that will not be exposed now, in order to keep this statement brief. With regards to substance, the Commission believes that the herbicides trifluralin and isoproteron should remain on the list of banned inputs that appear in Annex 1, document 56185/15 Rev 2. If some of the member states were to prefer the contrary, we would be prepared to explain the reasons behind this opinion. Thank you, Commission. The Presidency has taken note of this contribution.
The UK. Thank you, Chair. The UK would like to say that indeed the state of play is not what it was 3 years ago when drafting of this instrument began. New developments have meant that the position of the UK has changed. We would now kindly request that the two aforementioned herbicides, trifluralin and isoproteron, be removed from the list of ban inputs in Annex 1. Thank you, UK. Finland, then Ireland. Finland, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Given the change in position of some of the stakeholders in the industry and recent developments in general, Finland would like to lodge a scrutiny reservation in order for experts to have a look at existing wording in the light of the new situation. Thank you. Thank you, Finland. The floor goes to the Irish delegation. Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, we would like simply to say that we fully support the statements made by our UK counterparts. Thank you, Ireland. I see it is now the Commission's turn to take the floor for its explanatory statement. You have the floor. Commission?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The person who's prepared this presentation is on their way. I'm afraid they will need a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Commission. In that case, I suggest we take a 5-minute coffee break. Would delegates please return to their seats at 1/4 the hour? Coffee break. Thank you.